Hey everyone, welcome back to the Non-Skinnerian podcast, where we break down psychology, behavior, and all the sneaky little tricks our brains like to play on us. I'm your host Roman Rackwitz, and today we are going to dive into something a lot of us have been tempted by: brain training games. You know, those apps that promise to boost your memory, make you sharper, maybe even younger in your thinking. Sounds great, right? Well, here's the thing. Even though the marketing around these games makes them look like a miracle for your brain, the science tells us a very different story. So today we are going to take a closer look at these claims, break them down and see if playing these games is really doing your brain any favors, or if it's just another clever sales tactic. Alright, so let's start with some basics. You might have heard of games like Brain Age. It was huge a while back, especially on devices like the Nintendo DS. The idea is that by playing these little puzzles and memory challenges, you could essentially train your brain, keeping it sharp as a tech. And hey, who wouldn't want to make their brain younger, right? But unfortunately, the whole sharper brain thing isn't as straightforward as it sounds. Now, don't get me wrong, there is some short-term fun here. You might feel like you are improving as you get faster at solving the puzzles. But what does that actually mean for your everyday life? Not much, it turns out. So let's break this down in plain terms. When you play these games, you do get better, but only at playing these games themselves. You are practicing certain tasks over and over, so naturally you get faster and more accurate at those specific tasks. But here's the kicker. Those improvements don't spill over into real life. It's like getting really good at doing push-ups. You're working specific muscles, but it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be amazing at running a marathon. The marketing of these games though? Oh, they're really smart about how they sell this stuff. A lot of their ads promise cognitive improvement, which sounds pretty serious, right? But if you dig a little deeper, it's really just a fancy way of saying, you'll get better at these puzzles. There's very little evidence that these games make you better at other important thinking tasks, like remembering where you left your keys or suddenly being able to solve complex problems at work. So why do we buy into this stuff? I mean, people have spent millions on brain training apps. Why? Well, part of the reason is something called authority bias. Basically, we trust people with fancy titles, like neuroscientists, when they endorse something. In the case of Brain Age, they had this guy, Dr. Kawashima, a real neuroscientist whose presence made the game feel super credible. When you have a doctor's face on the screen telling you your brain is getting younger as you play, it's easy to believe it. But here's the thing. Just because an expert endorses something doesn't mean it's been scientifically proven. It's like when a dentist recommends a certain toothpaste. Sure, it might work. But are we really going to ask for the research studies? Probably not. We trust the white coat and move on. In this case, Brain Age used that trust to its advantage, even though the research behind the game's claims was shaky at best. Now let's talk about another big hook these games use: negativity bias. This one is super interesting because it taps right into one of our biggest fears: losing our mental sharpness. You've probably seen those ads where people are struggling to remember things or having a hard time focusing, and the message is clear: you don't want this to be you. The fear of cognitive decline, especially as we age, is real, and these companies know how to play on that. I mean, think about it. If you see an ad telling you that your memory could slip away or your thinking could slow down if you don't start training your brain, it's hard not to feel a little panicked. You start to think, what if I don't do this? Will I get worse? And before you know it, you're downloading the app because it feels like a safety net. But again, the science just doesn't support the idea that playing these games is going to protect you from memory loss or mental decline. What they are really good at is making you feel like you're doing something important. You get a score, maybe your brain age goes down, and it feels great. And I mean, that's fine, no question about that. It taps into our brain's reward system, so why not? That little dopamine hit makes you want to come back for more, even if the long-term benefits aren't really there. This whole setup is what we call gamification. Basically, it's taking something that's usually boring, like self-improvement, and turning it into a game. So, a very famous term for that is a serious game, where you are explicitly playing something, and this something becomes much more interesting because it's in this kind of context of a game, where you have something like a narrative, where you have something like challenges, where you can progress, and you're not always progressing. You are achieving always this, or a lot of time, you're achieving this almost concept that we have talked about in another podcast. And hey, I'll admit it's fun. Who doesn't like seeing their progress tracked and getting better scores? But fun doesn't always equal effectiveness. And this is really a very important message that I want to get over here. So does that mean these brain training games are completely useless? Not exactly. They can be a fun way to pass the time, and they do keep your brain engaged in the short term. But if you're hoping they'll make you a genius or somehow stop your brain from aging, you might want to rethink that. Let's talk about what the research says. Psychologist Dan Simmons, who studied cognitive training, found that these games really only help you get better at specific tasks. For example, if you're practicing memory exercises, sure, you might improve at remembering things in a game, but does that mean you're suddenly going to be able to remember where you parked your car every single time? Not necessarily. The improvement is very narrow. It doesn't carry over into other areas of your life. And here's where we see a parallel to something called the Mozart effect. Have you heard of that? It was this idea that listening to classical music, specifically Mozart, could make you smarter. People were really into this for a while, and some parents even started playing Mozart for their babies, hoping it would boost their intelligence. But, spoiler alert, listening to music doesn't magically increase your IQ. Just like with brain training, it was more of a nice story that got blown out of proportion. In both cases, we see how powerful these ideas are. We want to believe there's an easy way to get smarter, to sharpen our minds, to protect ourselves from cognitive decline. And marketers are experts at tapping into that desire. They give us hope in the form of a game or a piece of music, and we buy into it because it feels like an easy fix. But as you have probably guessed by now, there aren't really any shortcuts when it comes to keeping our brains healthy. So what does work? Well, the truth is, keeping your brain sharp is more about maintaining a healthy lifestyle than playing a game. Things like staying physically active, eating a balanced diet, getting enough sleep, and staying socially engaged, these are the real ways to support your cognitive health. And if you like puzzles or brain games, that's great. Just don't expect them to be a cure-all. So, to wrap this up, brain training games? Fun? Yes. Miracle brain boosters? Not really. They are not a waste of time, but they are not going to make you smarter in any meaningful way. It's always good to challenge your mind, but the bigger picture is about how you live your life overall. Keep learning, stay curious, and take care of your body, because all of that plays into keeping your mind sharp for the long haul. Alright folks, that's all for today's episode. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive into brain training and the psychology behind it. If you've got any thoughts, questions, or just want to share your favorite brain game, feel free to reach out. And hey, if you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe and leave us a review. It helps us to get the word out. As always, stay curious, and I'll catch you next time on the Non-Skinnerian Podcast.